Welcome to our examination of the President and the Executive Branch. Because daily news reports so often showcase the President acting as head of state and chief diplomat, it is easy to overlook one of the President's primary responsibilities, administering the federal government. As chief executive, the President is constitutionally charged with ensuring that the laws be faithfully executed. Today, this responsibility means that the President oversees a bureaucracy of more than 4 million government employees, including the members of the military, while presiding over an astonishing annual budget of nearly $4 trillion. In addition, as we now consider, the President is the leader of the executive branch of government, which includes the Vice President, the Cabinet, the offices within the White House, and the entire federal bureaucracy. John Nance Garner, Franklin D. Roosevelt's vice president from 1933 to 1941, vulgarly commented that the vice presidency isn't worth a pitcher of warm piss. This insider's observation on the vice presidential office matches the perceptions of many Americans fairly well. But although the media and the public tend to ignore the vice presidency and to marginalize the responsibilities of the second in command, vice presidents have an enormously important function. They are first in line of succession to the presidency if the president should die or become incapacitated. Only 8 presidents have died while in office, and although presidential succession may not be the foremost consideration in selecting a running mate for many presidential candidates, it can be an issue. Bill Clinton, in describing his selection of Tennessee Senator Al Gore as his running mate, explained that his choice of Gore in part reflected Clinton's belief that Gore would make a good president if something happened to me. Many vice presidents serve a largely ceremonial function, performing such activities as attending state dinners, visiting foreign nations, and attending the funerals of foreign dignitaries. But vice presidents may have more substantive responsibilities depending upon their skill levels and the needs of the administration and the president. Sometimes, for example, a vice president acts as legislative liaison with Congress, particularly if the vice president has more experience in dealing with the legislative branch than the president. Such was the case with Al Gore, who had served 8 years in the House of Representatives and 8 years in the Senate, whereas the president under whom he served, Bill Clinton, lacked Washington experience. In other instances, vice president's policy expertise is a crucial resource for the administration. In the case of Vice President Dick Cheney, experience in foreign policy and national security determined the pivotal role he played in developing the foreign policy of George W. Bush's administration. Although vice presidents are only a heartbeat away from the presidency, their own election to the presidency, should they decide to run, is not ensured when their term as second in command has ended. It is true that several vice presidents, among them George H.W. Bush and Lyndon B. Johnson, have won election to the presidency in their own right, but many other former vice presidents have failed. Notably, Al Gore, Walter Mondale, and Gerald Ford, the vice presidents of Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and Richard Nixon, respectively, all went down to defeat at the polls in their bid for the White House. In selecting a vice presidential running mate, presidential candidates weigh several considerations. Would-be presidents strive for a balanced ticket, that is, to broaden their appeal to the electorate and increase their chances of getting elected. They select a running mate who brings diversity of ideology, geographic region, age, gender, race, or ethnicity to the slate. Or they may base their vice presidential selections on their own shortcomings, whether in foreign policy, policy expertise, or in governing expertise. For example, as a candidate vying for the presidency against Senator John McCain, an older and respected member of the U.S. Senate, Barack Obama chose Senator Joe Biden, who was thought to complete Obama in terms of age. Biden was 65 years old compared with Obama's 47. Experience, Biden had served in the Senate since 1972, Obama only since 2000. And expertise, Biden was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Obama had faced criticism in the media about his lack of foreign policy experience. In naming Alaska Governor Sarah Palin as his running mate, Senator McCain also sought to bring youth, vigor, and enthusiasm to the Republican ticket to complement his experience and expertise. McCain's selection was also designed to attract the votes of women and cultural conservatives. Since George Washington's presidency, every president has depended upon the advice of a cabinet. the group of experts chosen by the President to serve as advisors on running the country. These advisors serve as the heads of each of the executive departments. This chart shows you the 15 departments of the Cabinet. Each Cabinet member, except the head of the Department of Justice, is called the Secretary of that department. The head of the Department of Justice is called the Attorney General. President George W. Bush created the newest department, the Department of Homeland Security, in 2002. This department is charged with increasing the nation's preparedness, particularly with respect to catastrophic events such as terrorist attacks and natural disasters. George Washington's cabinet consisted of the heads of only 4 departments: Justice, State, Treasury, and War. The last is now called the Department of Defense. Subsequent presidents added other departments. Each president may also designate cabinet rank to other advisors whose agencies are not permanent cabinet members. Typically, presidents have specified that their national security advisor, director of the Office of Management and Budget, and administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency be included in their administration's cabinet. Today, presidents and the public scrutinize presidential cabinet appointees to determine whether, in the words of Bill Clinton, they look like America. As the data in this table confirms, this is a relatively new gauge, since only 3 women and 2 members of ethnic minority groups had served in presidential cabinets until the Carter administration. Increasingly, however, as the table shows, presidential cabinets have become more diverse, with significant strides made during the Clinton administration. President Clinton became the first president to appoint a woman to any of the Big Four posts when he named Janet Reno, Attorney General, and Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State. George W. Bush named Colin Powell the first black Secretary of State, and when Powell resigned, Bush replaced him with Condoleezza Rice, an African-American woman who had served previously as National Security Advisor. Female members of President Obama's cabinet include Hillary Rodham Clinton as Secretary of State, Labor Secretary Hilda Solis, who is Latina, Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano, Secretary of Health and Human Services Kathleen Sebelius, Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lisa Jackson, who is African American, and United States Ambassador Susan Rice, who is also African American. Other African Americans in Obama's cabinet include Attorney General Eric Holder and U.S. Trade Representative Ron Kirk. Latinos also include Interior Secretary Ken Salazar, and 3 Asian Americans, Secretary of Commerce Gary Locke, Secretary of Veterans Affairs Eric Shinesky, and Energy Secretary Stephen Chu serve in the Obama cabinet. Whereas the cabinet usually functions as an advisory board for the president, the Executive Office of the President, otherwise known as the EOP, typically is the launch pad for the implementation of policy. The offices, councils, and boards that compose the EOP help the president to carry out the day-to-day responsibilities of the presidency and similarly assist the First Lady and Vice President in their official activities. The EOP also coordinates policies among different agencies and departments. Among the EOP offices, several are particularly important, including the White House Office, or WHO, the National Security Council, or NSC, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, and the Council of Economic Advisors. These offices are crucial, not only because of the prominent issues with which they deal, but also because of their strong role in developing and implementing policy in these issue areas. Playing a pivotal role in most presidential administrations, the White House Office, or WHO, staff members develop policies favored by the presidential administration and protect the president's legal and political interests. They research policy and keep the president informed about policy issues on the horizon. WHO staffers also regularly interact with members of Congress, their primary goal being to get presidential policy priorities enacted into law. They strive to ensure that those policies, once passed into law, are administered in keeping with the president's expectations. Because of the enormous influence of staff members in the White House office, presidents take pains to ensure their loyalty and trustworthiness. Among the top staff members of the White House office is the Chief of Staff, who serves as both an advisor to the President and manager of the White House office. Other staff members with clout include the Press Secretary, the President's spokesperson to the media, and the White House Counsel, the President's lawyer. The President's Secretary and Appointments Secretary are also influential WHO employees. They act as gatekeepers by controlling access to the President by other staffers and by members of Congress and the Cabinet. The President consults members of the National Security Council, or NSC, on domestic and foreign matters related to national security. Since its creation in 1947 during the Truman administration, the NSC has advised presidents on key national security and foreign policy decisions and assisted in the implementation of those decisions by coordinating policy administration among different agencies. For example, once the president has decided on a specific policy, the NSC might coordinate its implementation among the Department of State, the CIA, or Central Intelligence Agency, various branches of the military, and diplomatic officials. The President officially chairs the NSC. Its other regular members include the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, and the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, who is responsible for administering the day-to-day operations of the NSC and its staff. Other administration officials serve the NSC in advisory capacities or are invited to meetings when matters concerning their area of expertise are being decided. Once part of the Department of the Treasury, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, which originally was called the Bureau of the Budget, has been a separate office within the EOP since 1939. Its chief responsibility is to create the President's annual budget, which the President submits to Congress each January. The budget outlines all of the anticipated revenue that the government will receive in the next year, usually from taxes and fees paid by businesses and individuals. The budget also lists the anticipated expenditures for the coming year, detailing how much money the various departments and agencies in the federal government will have available to spend on salaries, administrative costs, and programs. The OMB is among the President's most important agencies for policy making and policy implementation. The Director of the Office of Management and Budget, a presidential appointee confirmed by the Senate, that's a question that the AP will ask you often, has a staff of about 600 career civil servants. In recent decades, the OMB Director has figured prominently in presidential administrations and typically has been designated a member of the Cabinet. The Director's job is complex. He or she interacts intensively with Congress, trying to ensure that the budget that passes resembles the President's proposed budget as closely as possible. The Director also lobbies members of Congress with the goal of ensuring that the key provisions of the budget that are important to the President remain intact in the congressionally approved version. Once Congress approves the budget, the Director of the OMB turns attention to its implementation, since it is the job of the OMB staff to manage the budget's execution by federal departments and agencies, to ensure that monies are spent on their designated purposes and that fraud and financial abuse do not occur. This managerial responsibility of the Office of Management and Budget was the reasoning behind the change in the office's name from the Bureau of the Budget in 1970.